The drama surrounding Rin Nakai was never supposed to end like this. To most people watching from the outside, she looked too small, too strange, too different to survive in a sport built around intimidation. At just 5'1", standing across, from women who looked physically larger and more conventionally dangerous, Rin didn't fit the image of a terrifying cage fighter. She looked like someone the internet could laugh at. And for years, people did exactly that. They mocked her muscles. They mocked the modeling photos. They mocked the round girl work. Critics looked at her and saw a gimmick, a bodybuilder pretending to fight, a woman trying too hard to stand out in a brutal sport that doesn't forgive weakness. But what those people never understood was that Rin Nakai was never pretending to be dangerous. She was dangerous long before the cameras arrived, long before the UFC, and long before the internet realized that every joke aimed at her eventually came back with consequences attached. Born in Matsuyama, Japan in 1986, Rin's life started with discipline before fame ever entered the picture. She began judo at just 3 years old, not because she dreamed of becoming a fighter, but because she followed her older brother into a dojo and simply never stopped showing up. Most children quit when things become difficult. Rin became obsessed. By the age of 15, she had already climbed into the top 5 rankings in Japan for her division. While other teenagers worried about school events or social circles, Rin was already building the foundation of a machine, the kind of machine critics would later underestimate at their own expense. As she grew older, she moved alone to Tokyo to train at an elite level, sacrificing the comfort of a normal life for the uncertainty of combat sports. She enrolled in university, but eventually dropped out because the cage had already consumed her future. Fighting gave her something academics never could: clarity. Inside the cage, there were no politics, no fake smiles, no confusion. Either you survive or you don't. And Rin Nakai survived everything. What made her impossible to ignore wasn't just the fighting ability, it was the contradiction she represented. Here was a woman with the physique of a tank, posing for fitness, magazines, working as a round girl between fights, then stepping into the cage weeks later and tearing through experienced opponents with brutal submissions and knockouts. Fans didn't know how to process her. Japanese MMA forums exploded with confusion. Was she a model, a fighter, a bodybuilder? The answer was all of them at once, and that combination made her unforgettable. Every time someone judged her based on appearance instead of skill, they learned the same painful lesson. Her professional debut in 2006 lasted only 85 seconds. Her opponent entered with experience and confidence, probably expecting an easy night against the muscular newcomer who had recently been carrying round cards at events. Instead, Rin shattered her nose and announced herself to the sport in the most violent way possible. It wasn't merely a victory, it was a warning. From that moment forward, the wins stacked up relentlessly. Armbars, kimuras, brutal ground control, sudden knockouts. Promotion after promotion fed opponents into the storm, and nearly all of them walked away damaged physically or mentally. The terrifying part was how casually she balanced 2 completely different worlds. One week she was smiling and promotional, shoots. The next week she was breaking orbital bones inside a cage. Imagine standing backstage preparing for your own fight and realizing the same woman who held up the round cards earlier was now dismantling another professional fighter in front of a screaming crowd. That duality became Rin Nakai's signature: soft-spoken outside the cage, ruthless inside it. By the time she captured titles across Japan and built an undefeated streak, she had already become one of the most unique fighters in women's MMA. Yet outside Japan, many still ignored her accomplishments. Then came the UFC call in 2014. For most fighters, signing with the UFC is validation. For Rin, it became the beginning of the most misunderstood chapter of her career. The UFC signed her without properly building a division that fit her natural size. Rin was a true flyweight forced to compete at bantamweight against naturally larger women. The disadvantage wasn't small, it was enormous. Taller opponents, longer reach, more natural weight. Yet instead of easing her into the promotion, the UFC matched her against elite-level competition immediately. Her debut came against Miesha Tate, one of the best women in the world at the time, a former champion, a proven veteran who had already survived wars against legends. For the first time in her professional career, Rin looked physically overwhelmed. She still fought with heart. She still created scrambles and moments of danger. But the size difference was impossible to ignore. Tate won by decision, handing Rin the first loss of her career. The internet immediately attacked. Suddenly, the same people who once mocked her appearance claimed she never belonged at the elite level. Another loss followed against Leslie Smith. And just like that, the UFC erased her from the roster as if she had failed some impossible test. Most fighters break after moments like that. Years of work destroyed in 2 losses. Careers disappear that way. Confidence disappears that way. But Rin Nakai responded differently. She returned to Japan with something far more dangerous than motivation. She returned with proof to collect. Only months after being cut, she faced Kanako Murata, a fighter who would later become an internationally respected champion. Rin submitted her, calmly, efficiently. The same year the UFC discarded her, she was choking out future elite talent back home. That moment exposed the truth. The UFC hadn't discovered a fraud. They had misunderstood a specialist and placed her in the wrong war. Then came the streak that rebuilt her legend entirely. One by one, opponents fell again. Submissions piled up. Veterans collapsed under pressure. Younger fighters entered believing age had finally caught up with her, only to discover that Rin Nakai, at nearly 40 years old, was still finishing fights faster than fighters half her age. While critics expected decline, Rin evolved into something even scarier: experience combined with durability. Across nearly 30 professional fights spanning decades, nobody knocked her out. Nobody submitted her. Not once. Think about how insane that is in a sport as unforgiving as MMA. Every fighter breaks eventually. Every fighter gets exposed eventually. But Rin Nakai refused to shatter. Outside the cage, she remained bizarrely peaceful, fishing in the countryside, caring for rabbits, posting flower photos online like someone's quiet neighbor, and maybe that contrast made her even more intimidating. Because underneath that calm personality was a woman capable of snapping limbs and ending careers without hesitation. That's why the people who mocked her always ended up humbled. They saw the muscles and laughed. They saw the modeling and assumed weakness. They saw the UFC losses and thought the story was over. But Rin Nakai kept winning long after the doubters disappeared. Long after the memes died. Long after the critics stopped paying attention. She kept entering cages and proving the same lesson over and over again. Appearances mean absolutely nothing once the door closes behind you. At 39 years old, even retirement seemed unable to stop her. She continued competing in grappling, events, still collecting submissions like trophies, still moving with the hunger of someone trying to prove herself despite already building a legendary career. And maybe that's the most terrifying thing about Rin Nakai. She never needed validation from major promotions or headlines. She built her legacy through violence, consistency, and survival. While others chased fame, Rin chased mastery. The woman, many dismissed as a gimmick, ended her career arc as one of the toughest fighters Japanese MMA has ever produced. 28 victories, countless finishes, nearly 2 decades of combat without ever being stopped. A fighter too strange for people to understand until it was far too late. And the next time someone laughs at a fighter because they look different, too small, too muscular, or too unconventional, they should remember Rin Nakai. Because every single person who underestimated her eventually learned the same brutal truth. The bill always arrives with interest. If you enjoyed this story and want more deep-dive fight documentaries about the most feared, underrated, and unstoppable warriors in combat sports history, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next legend. And tell us in the comments, do you think the UFC completely failed Rin Nakai, or would she have become a world champion if the flyweight division existed earlier?